Recovered Guild Expedition Report. Status: unresolved. Begin record.
There are monsters in the world of Monster Hunter that kill with claws. Others kill with venom. Some hunt with brute force. Others rely on ambush. But deep beneath the frozen cliffs of the Frost Islands, hunters once encountered something far more disturbing. A monster that didn't simply kill its prey. A monster that used people. A monster that turned victims into living bait. Because the most terrifying part wasn't that people disappeared. It was that they came back. They walked into town under their own power. They spoke with familiar voices. They remembered names. They laughed at old jokes. They hugged their families. And yet, something was wrong. Something subtle. Something that most people only noticed after it was already too late. Long pauses during conversation. Moments where they seemed distracted by an unseen voice. Strange movements that looked almost natural until you paid attention. The kind of behavior that could be explained away. The kind of behavior people desperately wanted to ignore until they realized a horrifying truth. The people who returned from the caves were still alive, still conscious, still aware, but they were no longer in control. The Frost Islands are among the most hostile regions ever surveyed by the Hunters Guild. Ancient shipwrecks lie frozen into cliff sides. Jagged coastlines disappear beneath storms with little warning. Cave systems stretch beneath the islands for miles, tunneling through ancient ice and forgotten stone. Entire expeditions have vanished in those depths. Most never return. For years, disappearances in the region were treated as unfortunate but unsurprising. The environment itself was deadly. Avalanches, hypothermia, hidden crevasses, countless monsters prowling beneath the snow. Death rarely needed an explanation. Then the pattern began. Not because people vanished, because they returned. Guild records recovered from the incident describe a sequence of disappearances concentrated near a network of caverns beneath the southern cliffs. The first victim returned after 3 days, the second after 1, the third after nearly a week. Every victim reported becoming lost underground. Every victim claimed to remember little. And every victim appeared physically unharmed. No major injuries. No signs of combat. No obvious symptoms of illness. The Guild initially dismissed the reports, until witnesses began describing the same strange behaviors, again and again and again. At first they sounded insignificant, then they became impossible to ignore. Tonight we're examining one of the most disturbing monster incidents ever attributed to a shrouded Nerscylla. A creature whose venom may have evolved into something far worse than paralysis. Something capable of transforming living people into unwilling extensions of its hunt. The first disappearance involved a fisherman, a man named Rendell, who had spent nearly 20 years working the frozen coastline. He knew the Frost Islands better than most hunters. When he failed to return home, nobody assumed he had simply gotten lost. Search parties were assembled immediately. They found footprints, a broken lantern, then nothing. The trail simply ended. 3 days later, shortly before dawn, Rendell walked back into the village. Several witnesses later described the moment. Snow fell heavily around him. His clothing was damp, his face pale, but otherwise he appeared unharmed. His wife rushed toward him, calling his name, crying. The fisherman stared at her, not speaking, not moving, for several seconds, long enough to become uncomfortable. Then suddenly he smiled, wrapped his arms around her, and apologized. Everyone assumed exhaustion was to blame. No one thought much of it, at least not then. When questioned by guild representatives, Rendell explained that he had become trapped within a cave system during a blizzard. He remembered falling. He remembered darkness. He remembered hearing strange sounds. After that, his memory became fragmented. The explanation seemed reasonable. The investigation ended. Life resumed for about a week. Then the changes began. Small things, the sort of details people notice only in hindsight. Rendell occasionally stopped speaking in the middle of conversations. Not because he was thinking, not because he lost his train of thought. He simply froze. His expression became distant, his eyes unfocused. Then after several seconds, he continued speaking exactly where he'd left off, as though no interruption had occurred. Friends joked about it. His wife blamed stress. Even Rendell seemed confused whenever people mentioned it. Then came the sleepwalking. Neighbors reported seeing him outside late at night, standing motionless in the snow, facing the southern cliffs. One witness observed him for nearly 15 minutes. He never moved, never shivered, never reacted to the freezing wind. When approached, he slowly turned toward the witness, smiled, and calmly explained that he couldn't sleep. The answer sounded normal, but the witness later admitted something felt deeply wrong. Not what he said, how he said it. Every word sounded rehearsed, as if someone had taught him how humans were supposed to converse, as if he were reciting rather than speaking. Weeks later, another villager disappeared, a young herbalist named Sarah. Unlike Rendell, she returned after only a single day. She appeared cheerful, energetic, perfectly healthy. Yet her friends immediately noticed strange behavior. During meals, she occasionally stared at walls for minutes at a time. While speaking, she would sometimes stop abruptly, freeze, then resume conversation without acknowledging the interruption. One evening, a close friend asked whether she was feeling all right. Sarah smiled. opened her mouth to answer, then remained silent. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. Her expression never changed. Then she finally spoke. "Sorry, I got distracted." Distracted by what? She couldn't explain, or perhaps wouldn't. The village slowly became uneasy. People whispered about the disappearances, whispered about the caves, whispered about those who came back. Then a child vanished, and everything changed. The boy disappeared while exploring abandoned wreckage along the coast. Search parties spent 3 days combing the shoreline. When he finally returned, the entire village celebrated. Yet the boy's mother later provided testimony that would become infamous among guild investigators. According to her statement, she awoke in the middle of the night and found her son standing beside her bed, watching her, not speaking, not blinking, simply staring. When she asked what he was doing, he remained motionless for nearly half a minute. Then he answered, "I was waiting." "Waiting for what?" The boy didn't respond. He simply turned around and walked away. The next morning he claimed to remember nothing, or perhaps he genuinely didn't. By then, dozens of villagers were reporting similar incidents. People staring into darkness, people wandering toward the cliffs, people pausing during conversations as though listening to distant instructions. And perhaps most disturbing of all, people who disappeared seemed strangely eager to encourage others to visit the caves. Hunters, gatherers, travelers, anyone willing to listen. The suggestions were always casual, always harmless, always delivered with a smile. "You should see the crystals down there. There are rare materials in the caverns. I found an incredible fishing spot nearby." Different words, same destination, the southern caves. Always the southern caves. And nobody understood why. The guild finally intervened after a hunting party failed to return. 4 hunters entered the southern caverns at sunrise. Only one came back. His name was Kale. When rescuers found him, he was crawling through the snow with one broken arm, torn armor, and webbing still clinging to his legs. He kept repeating the same sentence. "They were asking us to follow." At first, no one understood what he meant. Then he gave his report. The party had entered the caverns expecting to find a nest. They had prepared for spiders, prepared for poison, prepared for web traps. They had not prepared to hear familiar voices calling from the dark. Several hours into the descent, the hunters found Rendal standing in a tunnel beneath the ice. The fisherman looked frightened. He said he had followed strange tracks into the cave and become lost again. He begged the hunters to help him. Kyle said something about him felt wrong immediately. Rendell's voice was his own. His face was his own. But his body seemed delayed. When he raised a hand, the movement twitched halfway through. When he turned his head, it jerked too sharply. And when he spoke, there were pauses between words that didn't belong there. Not natural pauses, not hesitation. Something else, like a command traveling down a thin thread. Still, he was a civilian. The hunters approached. Rendal stepped backward, deeper into the tunnel. "There's another way out," he said. Then he paused. His mouth remained slightly open. His eyes went blank. For almost 10 seconds, he stood completely still. Then he finished. "This way." One hunter refused. He said they should return to the entrance and bring Rendal with them. That was when Rendal began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears running down his face. His mouth smiled, but his eyes were terrified. And then he whispered, "Please don't follow me." His body turned and walked deeper into the cave. A moment later, from farther inside the tunnel, they heard Sarah's voice, calling for help, then the child's voice, then others, dozens of voices, some pleading, some laughing, some repeating names of people outside the cave. The hunters followed, not because they trusted the voices, because they understood there might be survivors. The tunnel opened into a cavern so thick with webbing that the walls looked alive. White silk stretched between columns of ice. Bones hung in bundled clusters. Old armor pieces dangled like warning charms. Then the missing villagers appeared, one by one, standing between the web strands. Their movements were almost synchronized, heads turning together, hands twitching together, feet dragging across the stone. Some were weeping, some were smiling, some looked completely empty. Kyle said the worst part was that several were still trying to warn them. One woman whispered, "Run." A second said, "Don't listen to us." Another repeated, "I'm sorry," again and again while stepping closer. The hunters drew their weapons. That was when the ceiling moved. The shrouded Nerscylla descended without a sound. Its pale body blended with the webbing and frost. Its long limbs unfolded from the dark like hooked branches. A hide of stolen Gypsyros skin hung across its body, ragged and stained. Its jaws parted. The villagers stopped moving. All at once, the entire cavern became silent. Then the Nerscylla clicked its mandibles, and every infected person lunged. Not like fighters, like puppets. Their bodies flung themselves forward with violent, unnatural force. Some stumbled, some broke bones and kept moving. Some screamed as their own hands grabbed at the hunters. The party couldn't strike them down, Not at first. They were people, neighbors, victims, still alive, still aware, and that hesitation killed them. One hunter was pulled into a wall of webbing. Another was dragged beneath a hanging sheet of silk. Kyle saw his partner pinned by 3 infected villagers. While the Nerscylla lowered its stinger, the hunter begged for help. So did the villagers holding him down. They begged while restraining him. They sobbed while obeying. The stinger struck. The hunter convulsed once, then went still. Not dead. Worse. His head slowly lifted. His eyes focused on Kale, and in his own voice he said, "Kale, come here." That was when Kyle ran. He cut through webbing, fell through ice, crawled through tunnels barely wide enough to breathe. Behind him, voices followed, his friends' voices, the villagers' voices, all calling his name, all asking him to slow down, all promising they could lead him out. But beneath those voices, Kyle heard something else. A faint scraping above him, a body moving across the ceiling. The Nerscylla wasn't chasing loudly. It was guiding, letting the infected herd him through the tunnels, turning the entire cave into a throat, and Kyle was being swallowed. Kale's testimony changed everything. The guild sealed the southern cliffs within hours. No civilians were allowed near the caverns. A larger extermination force was assembled with flame weapons, antidotes, paralysis cures, and orders no hunter wanted to hear. Do not trust voices from inside. Do not approach survivors alone. Do not allow infected individuals physical contact. And if necessary, cut the threads. The second expedition entered at dawn. They found webbing within the first 100 steps. Then personal belongings, fishing tools, children's charms, hunter tags, all carefully placed where rescuers would notice them. The shrouded Nerscylla had not scattered its victims randomly. It had arranged them, bait at the entrances, bait near intersections, bait in places where sympathy would override caution. The deeper the hunters went, the more horrifying the design became. The caverns were not simply a nest. They were a trap system, a living lure. Infected victims stood in alcoves, waiting to call out when someone passed. Some repeated pleas they had clearly spoken hundreds of times. "Help me. I'm hurt. I know the way out." Others seemed aware enough to resist. A hunter recorded one infected man biting his own tongue to stop himself from speaking. Another had wedged her arm between rocks, trying to keep her body from walking. The venom did not erase them. It imprisoned them inside themselves. the final chamber lay beneath a frozen shipwreck, half buried in the island's cliffs. There, the guild found the heart of the nest. Hundreds of silk strands stretched from the ceiling to the floor, some connected to bodies, some to cocoons, some to bells made from bone and metal scraps, creating faint sounds whenever something moved through the tunnels. The Nerscylla had built an alarm system, and in the center of it all hung the monster itself. The battle was chaos. Fire tore through webbing. Infected victims collapsed and rose again. Hunters shouted commands over screams that sounded human. Several times, the Nerscylla retreated behind its own hostages, forcing the hunters to choose between hesitation and survival. Eventually, the creature was brought down. Its body crashed into the webbed floor, legs curling inward. The moment it died, many of the infected collapsed. Some woke screaming. Some never woke at all. Others remained conscious but unable to move, their nervous systems ruined by the venom. The official report concluded that the Shrouded Nerscylla had developed a rare venom mutation. Instead of merely paralyzing prey, the toxin allowed the monster to influence motor function through repeated exposure. Victims retained awareness, memory, fear, but their bodies could be overridden. Not constantly, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to make them walk. Enough to make them speak. Enough to make them lure someone they loved into the dark. The guild burned the nest. The caverns were sealed. The incident was buried beneath restricted archives. But the final notes are the reason hunters still whisper about the Frost Islands. Because after the purge, not every missing person was accounted for, and months later, patrols reported voices near the sealed caves. Familiar voices, calling from behind the ice, asking for help, pausing for just a little too long between words. Most monsters announce themselves, but the Shrouded Nerscylla beneath the Frost Islands hunted differently. It wore trust as a mask. It turned concern into weakness. It made compassion dangerous. Because how do you fight a monster when its first weapon is someone you love? How do you run from a friend begging you to stay? And how do you survive the moment you realize they are begging with their voice, but not with their body? So if you ever travel through the Frost Islands and hear someone calling from the caverns, listen carefully. Listen for the pauses, the stillness, the words that sound almost rehearsed. And if they smile while their eyes fill with fear, do not follow, do not answer, do not reach for their hand. Because somewhere above you, hidden in silk and frost, something may already be pulling the thread.
This report remains under investigation. The Guild closed this case. The archives did not.